So hello, welcome, namaste, good afternoon. Thanks to those of you joining me in the room. Thanks for those of you joining me on Zoom. And thanks to those of you listening to the recording afterwards. This is a little Dharma talk I like to call Living from the Heart, about this 18-inch spiritual journey, which can potentially take many, many lifetimes of traveling from the head to the heart. And I'll begin with a short poem of my own, follow it with the teachings, and we'll finish it with a short meditation practice. So today's poem is a short one from my book of short poems, from a book of short poems called Pebbles. And I wrote this book to be just like walking in a Zen garden. You uncover little gems of wisdom along the way. So this poem goes, do you know me? Do you really know me? My name is written in my heart in very small lettering. You have to come very close to read it. Do you also know yourself? We are the same. So the topic for today is what we sometimes call the bedrock of love, the foundation from which our love grows, which is understanding. As Thich Nhat Hanh says, understanding is love's other name. The deeper our understanding, the deeper the love. Every human being, big, small, old, young, we all want to be seen. So we even say in couples counseling, intimacy is into me see. Can you see into somebody? Do you really know them? There's a story of a family who went out to a restaurant for dinner. When the waitress arrived, the parents each gave their orders. Immediately, their 5-year-old daughter piped up with her own, and she said, I'll have a hot dog, French fries, and a Coke. Oh, no, you don't, interjected the dad, who turned to the waitress and said, she'll have vegetables, a lean meat, probably salmon, and a glass of healthy milk. The waitress paused and looked at the child with a smile and said, so, hun, what do you want on that hot dog? And when she left, the family sat stunned and silent. And a few moments later, the little girl, eyes shining, she said, she thinks I'm real. I always love that line. She thinks I'm real. And I think there's two fundamental lessons we can take from this story. One is we love each other into being. As human beings, we are extraordinarily dependent on others when we are born to literally survive. So it's not just like love is a nice thing to experience. We absolutely need it. Unlike birds who can flee the nest after just a few weeks, or even rabbits are pretty independent after a few months, the human species by far takes the most nurturing and caregiving in order to become the adults that we are today. So even Dan Siegel, the neuroscientist who is really into childhood development, will say, love grows brains. Love literally grows young brains. But the other lesson to take for this is that we all want to be accepted for who we are. We all want to be validated. And in this moment, the waitress, of course, validated this young child's desires. And this, of course, encourages them to know what they want, to express what they want, and that there are people in this world who will listen to them. So love and understanding, they work together. Understanding is love's other name. So we can begin by loving ourselves, by seeing our meditation practice as a way of giving attention to the most important person here, which is you. Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic, says, what can we gain by sailing to the moon if we are not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves? So I often point out that the Tibetan word for meditation is gom, which quite literally means to become familiar with. It is a familiarization. So we are getting in touch with the realm of interiority, with our internal experience of sensations and emotions and thoughts, and potentially any aspect of our inner experience that goes beyond sensations and emotions and thoughts. So even in yoga, we say, listen to your body's whispers now, so you don't have to hear it yell later. And of course, we see how this applies to a physical level. We have a little bit of a creakiness in our knee and a little bit of a pain in our lower back. And it's so easy to push it aside, to trudge on with our life, to even potentially not feel it at all through taking certain painkillers. But of course, if you don't listen to the creaky knee now or the pain in the low back, it might turn into a knee replacement later or a herniated disc later. And we have to listen to those little subtle messages that we're hearing now, not just from our bodies, but even from our hearts. So as we understand our internal world, we can understand our bodies and the signals that it tells us, like to slow down, or you're too stressed, or maybe walk in nature, or maybe eat a vegetable, all these little messages we receive from ourselves. And we can also listen to our heart's whispers as well. So perhaps our heart is telling us that something in our life isn't serving us. Maybe it's our job, maybe it's our partner, maybe it's a relationship with a certain family member. And we have those whispers now, maybe this part of your night, this part of your life needs a little calibration, a little attention. So that the whisper, say, of your partner, for example, telling you that they're not the most happy in the relationship doesn't turn into them yelling later that they want a divorce. So we listen to the subtle things now, the subtle messages of our body, the subtle messages of our hearts, the subtle messages from other people. So it doesn't become a bigger, deeper issue later on. So this is the beginning of understanding, understanding how our body is, understanding how our heart is. And this is one of the crucial aspects of self-love, simply understanding that you're human, and as a human, you have certain emotional needs. So sometimes we say that the difference between self-indulgence and self-love is self-indulgence is a cupcake for dinner, and self-love is a cupcake after dinner. And the cupcake after dinner recognizes, you know what, you've had a long day, you deserve a little treat. And this is what self-love is. It's attuned to your own emotional needs, and it acknowledges that you deserve to get those needs met. You deserve potentially a reward at the end of a long and stressful day. So we begin by loving ourselves, by thoroughly understanding ourselves. Now, I say this like it's easy because it's not. As any one of us who have tried to sit down for 5-10 minutes and calm the breath and focus on the mind. As the writer Anne Lamott put it, my mind is a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone at night. Right. So sometimes as soon as we sit down and, even maybe your meditation teacher is like, oh, just breathe with ease, just find ease. And your mind is like, you're like sitting in a closet with somebody with a megaphone, just yelling right into it. Right? A Rumi sometimes describes it as like a battering ram in the head. Suddenly, our inner world is not nearly as peaceful as perhaps we would like. So sometimes we say self-knowledge is not necessarily good news. Right? So even if you do listen to your heart and it says, yeah, maybe you should quit your job. Maybe you do need to move to a town that's farther away from certain people in your life. Sometimes following our heart is extraordinarily inconvenient. Sometimes it's extraordinarily not easy. That's why John Kabat-Zinn says that meditation is not for the faint of heart. All right, it requires a certain discipline and it requires a certain gumption. So understanding is the bedrock of love, and part of loving ourselves is understanding ourselves. So even Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, there's two ways to translate a particular verse. One is somebody who knows others is clever. Somebody who knows themselves is wise. Now, there are often many different ways to translate the same verse. So sometimes people take it to the next step and they say, if you know others, you are wise. If you know yourself, you are enlightened. So in the yogic path, in the Buddhist path, self-knowledge and self-awakening are synonymous. Once you truly know who you are, liberation, freedom naturally arises from that understanding. So it takes time. It takes many lifetimes, potentially. So we talked about loving ourselves. We can talk about loving others as well. And I want you to imagine, just imagine you wanted to do something special for your partner. Whether you have a partner, doesn't matter. Just imagine you want to do something special for somebody in your life. So, you make a lovely dinner for them. And the whole time you're making dinner, you're thinking about them and how happy they are going to be once you serve them the dinner. And then when you do serve it, you realize that everything you made was wrong. You put in shellfish in the stew, and they are allergic to shellfish. You roasted Brussels sprouts, and they hate Brussels sprouts. You made a great dessert with dairy, and they are lactose intolerant. Now, if they were to eat this dinner, it would cause them an extraordinary amount of suffering. Yes. So we often say that love without understanding has the potential to cause a lot of suffering. Now, it's a bit of a facetious story, of course, but I think we probably have all experienced certain times in our life where misunderstanding or not feeling understood did not result in, say, the loving intention that somebody had for us actually turn into a loving act. So there's also a phrase where a monkey takes the fish, puts him up in the tree, and says, "Let me save you, or you'll drown." And it's like, if you don't understand the unique needs of another person, particularly how those needs are different than your own, and you could extrapolate this to love languages, for example. Someone might have a completely different love language, and you need to learn to speak that so that they indeed feel loved. There's another story where a wife turns to her husband and says, "Last night," she goes, "I had a dream where I was wearing this large and beautiful diamond necklace. What do you think that means?" And husband said, "Well, you'll find out tonight." That night, the husband comes home with a wrapped present. Excitedly, the wife opens it. She finds a book, How to Interpret Dreams. Yes. So love without understanding can indeed create a lot of suffering. So another scenario I might have you imagine. Imagine coming home after a rough day of work and telling your partner about your day. You had a really stressful day and you really just wanted to kind of have somebody listen to you. And after sharing your struggles and everything that happened, your partner replies, "I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. But I wanted to say that I love you and that you're perfect." Obviously, such a empty platitude fails to meet you in that moment and falls flat. So sometimes when we even talk about loving relationships, we say what most people think love is just the beginning of love, the kind of love you see in romantic comedies and the love we sing in our songs. This idea of falling in love is just the beginning of love, because then we do the real work of actually being in love. But so too, what a lot of times when people think they are loving, it's really just that they have the intention. I have the intention to love you right now. But if we don't have that understanding, if we don't have that empathetic ear, if we're not able to listen to them, then there's not going to be any love, because we all need to be seen. So this is where the practice of listening comes in, of real, mindful, empathic listening. So even in mindfulness, we often describe ourselves as having a bare attention. Bare as in B-A-R-E, aka like a naked attention, which is a way of listening with no agenda, with no judgment. That's where the nakedness, you remove your own desire to say, tell a better story or problem solve. In therapy, we call it premature problem solving, when somebody isn't able to fully listen to somebody and they immediately jump to solutions. So it's not easy, as we've learned, when we try to say, listen to the body or listen to the heart or listen to the breath. It's really hard to listen to those whispers when we do have that person with the megaphone next to it, when we do have a very noisy and cluttered mind. So we sit here to practice listening. That's what Adyashanti says. He just says spirituality is the art of listening. And I always love that. So another tip I have for you, if you want to deepen your understanding of your partner, you can always ask them how you can be more loving, how you can support them in whatever it is that they are going through. So you probably heard this poem by Hafiz. It goes, "It happens all the time in heaven, and someday it will begin to happen again on earth. That men and women who are married, and men who are lovers, and women and women who give each other light, often get down on their knees, and while so tenderly holding their lover's hand, with tears in their eyes, will sincerely speak, saying, 'My dear, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind?'" When I think about that question, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind? Think about the vulnerability that arises because, of course, they might say, well, you're a little bit deficient in this area. You really made that mistake yesterday. You really said that thing yesterday that, say, hurt me. And we have to be open to that vulnerability. This is why we are practicing bare attention, because we're removing our own judgments, not only on the person we are listening to, but also on ourselves. We are watching our own reactivity so that we can respond to the situations in our life with understanding and with compassion. So some probably know that quote, "Hell is other people," by Sartre. And this is a big misunderstanding of what this word means, because it's from a play where people are trapped. And what they really mean by hell is other people is that hell is the judgmental gaze of others. Hell is other people judging you as right or wrong, invalidating who you are. And heaven is the opposite. Heaven is when we are seen, honored, accepted, and validated for just who we are. So I love that Hafiz says this is what happens all the time in heaven, and maybe one day it can happen again on earth. We can bring heaven to earth. It's another excerpt of a poem I love by Shane Koizikan. He wrote, "The conversation came after you asked me about heaven. You told me you thought that heaven would be specific to each person, and each person would have their own version of it. And you asked me, what would mine be? You said you don't have to believe what I believe. It's enough to be good. So be good. And I will. And I will think about your heaven." So I love that. Thinking about your heaven. Think about what we can do for others. And as I mentioned, it's really easy to jump to premature problem solving. And a huge reason we prematurely problem solve is because we're not able to sit with and be with the discomfort. And this is one of the biggest inquiries that usually comes up when we do sit for meditation, where people say, what should I do about this pain in my back or this pain in my hip, or I have this itch? And there's two approaches. First of all, we can be compassionate to ourselves. There's a big difference between meditating for 30 minutes and being in pain because your hip really hurts. We're not here to force ourselves to suffer for 30 minutes. So if your back does hurt, if your hip does hurt, you can move, you can adjust your position. It's okay. But what you might try is before you adjust, see if you could watch it. So we sometimes say meditation is watching the itch without scratching it. Because something we learn when we do pay attention to this moment is we understand that nothing lasts. And often the itch will go away on its own. Often the pain will go away on its own. And we are similarly increasing our own capacity to be with suffering, increasing our own capacity to be with discomfort. And we do this by ourselves on the mat. So that increases our capacity to be with suffering off the meditation cushion, off the yoga mat. So that when somebody perhaps in our life is suffering, we can sit with them and sit with their suffering. There's a story of a woman who had a brain injury. And as a result of her injury, she would sometimes collapse on the floor. And whenever that happened, people around her would rush to get her immediately back on her feet. But before she was ready. So when asked about it, she would say, I think that people rush to help me because they are so uncomfortable seeing an adult lying on the floor. What I really need is someone to get down on the ground with me. And even hearing this story, I'm like, I would probably do the same thing if I saw somebody in the grocery store fall to the ground. That's the first thing I would do. I'd rush over and perhaps help them back up. I wouldn't potentially think, oh, maybe I can just sit on the ground with them. So you might have even heard Brené Brown talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is when your friend is down in a hole and you're looking down and you're like, wow, deep hole. That sucks to be there. Empathy is climbing down the ladder into the hole and joining them and saying, wow, it does suck down here. And it's that shared emotion. So just like the person collapsing on the floor, it's joining them on the ground with them. So I do love Thich Nhat Hanh's mantra. It's simple. I hear you and I'm here for you. And another one by him goes, darling, I know that you are suffering. That is why I am here for you. And this is also a mantra we can bring to our own meditation practice. If, for example, we do experience pain in our hip, pain in our back, or even pain in our heart, we can say that same mantra to ourselves. Darling, I am here for you. Darling, I know that you're suffering, and that's why I'm here for you. So it's, I know that you are suffering. That's the key mindfulness piece. That's the key recognition, willingness, and ability to sit with and be with the suffering, which of course isn't easy, but it is crucial to understanding somebody, to be close to them. Obviously, rejoicing together in the good times is crucial for relationships, but you also want to be there for each other during the hard times. Another reason we don't jump to premature problem solving is most problems can't be solved. If your partner is sick, you can't solve their sickness, but you can share in it. You can share the pain and share the discomfort. And this is key to understanding. So even the Gottmans, they research couples and they separate what they call the difference between the masters and the disasters. Maybe you've heard of them. So one of their cornerstones to a successful relationship is what they call love maps. And basically, just as a map tells you a little bit about the territory, so too they find couples in successful relationships have very strong love maps of their partner. They know their partner on an intimate level. They have that capacity to into me see. So it's everything from, say, name some of your partner's good friends, to name your partner's favorite color, to what is your partner's dream for their future. And this, of course, involves the same questions we talked about before, actually getting to know the person that you are with. There's another story of a saint who was once visiting a river to take a bath, and they found a group of family members on the banks shouting in anger at each other. Perhaps you've heard this story. The saint turns to his disciples, smiles, and asks, why do people in anger shout at each other? The disciples thought for a while. Then one of them said, because we lose our calm and we shout. The saint inquired, why should you shout when the other person is next to you? You can just as well tell them what you have to say in a soft manner. The disciples gave some other answers, but none satisfied the teacher. And finally, the saint explained, when two people are angry at each other, their hearts distance quite a lot. To cover that distance, they must shout to be able to hear the other. The angrier they are, the stronger they will have to shout at each other to cover that great distance. What happens when two people fall in love? They don't shout at each other, but talk softly because their hearts are very close. The distance between them is either non existent or very small. The saint continued, when they love each other even more, what happens? They do not speak, only whisper, and they get even closer to each other in their love. Finally, they do not need even a whisper. They only look at each other, and that's all. That is how close two people are when they love each other. The saint looked at his disciples and said, so, when you argue, do not let your hearts get distant. Do not say words that distance each other more, or else there will come a day when the distance is so great that you will not find the path to return. So we've talked about loving ourselves. We talked about loving people close to us, which we can take these same lessons to even our friends and our family members, not just our intimate partners. We can have love maps for all the important people in our life. But we can also extrapolate it to loving others. What does it mean to understand somebody on a deep level? And I think one of the crucial lessons we find from the Four Noble Truths is the first one. People often translate it as life is suffering. But most people say it's not that all of life is suffering. It's just that there is suffering in life. Suffering is an essential part of the human condition. We all suffer in big ways and small ways. And this is a crucial lesson in truly understanding somebody, is because we all tend to put on a face as we go about in this world. And somebody asks, how are you? And maybe your parents in the hospital and your kid is sick in bed and your job, the company that you're working for might go under and you're anxious about some test result from your own doctor. And what do you say? I'm fine. We so easily and often hide and put away our suffering from others. And I find in my experience, if you scratch the surface of anybody's life, underneath of it, you will find suffering. You can also think of suffering as unhappiness. This word dukkha, many ways to translate it. You can also think of it as unease. You can also think of it as dissatisfaction. So, like Mick Jagger said, we can't get no satisfaction. The human experience is one of disappointment, unease, unhappiness, which of course doesn't negate that life is full of joys. The Buddhists say this life has 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, but we tend not to acknowledge the sorrows because we're not able to sit with discomfort. And that's, of course, why we have to start with ourselves first. So the more you're able to sit with your own discomfort, the more compassionate you are to your own discomfort, the more you're able to be with others' discomfort as well, which will be the gateway to compassion. So you probably heard the phrase, be kind to everyone you meet, for each person is fighting their own battles. Yeah. In fact, two things happened last week before this talk. One is I have a lot of stuff. So I have a box and I had it in my passenger seat. So I opened the door and I got out the box, set it on the car. And then I walked around to get something else from the other side of the car. And this woman drove by in her big SUV, her window was down, and she shouted, "You can't leave your door open like that." And I was like, wow, what a lovely interaction to have with a stranger. I've just been yelled at. And I was like, okay, I bet that person is having a rough day. I bet that person in some way is suffering. And just a little door, that little inconvenience, just added to the stress of their day. So we can be kind to everyone that we meet, even those that say, yell at us from their cars, perhaps insulting things. But Also, last week, we talked about ending the war within ourselves in order to end the war outside of ourselves. And if we think about ending war outside of ourselves, understanding is key. Understanding what we call or might label as, say, enemies or the other side or the people that potentially one group is trying to destroy. So I do think that listening to another person's story is the gateway to peace in this world. There is an inscription at the Genocide Memorial in Rwanda, and it reads, "If you knew me, and if you really knew yourself, you would not have killed me." And I think it's important that it starts with self-knowledge. If you knew me, and you really knew yourself, you would not have killed me. So Henry Wadsworth Longfellow put it the same when he wrote, "If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering. And we would find so much sorrow and suffering, it would be enough to disarm all hostility." So a very powerful mantra that we sometimes teach in compassion trainings is what's known as the just like me mantra or the just like you mantra. Because it's important to recognize when you think about this journey from the head to the heart, think about the journey from the brain to the heart. We have to acknowledge the brain, the mind is very good at difference, very good at separation. It's very discriminative between individuals. As you look around with a group of people, your brain is like, ah, yes, tall person, ah, short person, ah, big nose, ah, small bones, ah, I'm attracted to this person, oh, I'm not attracted to that person, oh, more melanin, oh, less melanin. This is what the brain does. It's a lovely categorization and separation machine. To a certain extent, it's useful. The mind is a great tool, but a terrible master. If you're making a nice dinner for your partner after you've learned their allergies and other desires, you want to be able to separate, the oregano from the cayenne pepper. It's good to know that separation. But fundamentally, compassion arises from commonness and not difference. So I sometimes think as the mind is like level one, discriminative awareness, good at creating separation, can change the channel to the realm of the heart that looks beyond surface level appearances of gender and hair and height and sees that behind this is a person just like you. Behind this is a person who wants to be happy and does not want to suffer, who has hopes and dreams and has made mistakes. It's a lovely mantra. You can use it walking down the street. That person is just like me. They want to be happy. They do not want to suffer. They're trying their best. They have lost people, just as I have lost people in my life. They have made mistakes, just as I have made mistakes. And they are just as deserving of love as I am. Another poem here from Naomi Shihab Nye. She wrote, "The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, or where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends, you don't care." So when we do shift to that level two awareness, we see the unity behind the diversity. Of course, we're not ignoring or pretending diversity doesn't exist. We're just seeing a different level of awareness. And we can work on multiple levels of awareness at once. We can see the unity and see the diversity. Problem is, we've been largely uh, acculturated to see difference and not so much to see sameness, to see what we sometimes refer to as our common humanity. So in meditation, for example, it's a really lovely shift of awareness as we drop out of identification with our own sort of isolated and separate self. We begin to experience that union. Even yoga, this word means union, as just as we yoke or bring together. So we might, for example, I'm just using the same example as hip pain, back pain, heart pain. We can shift from thinking this is my pain that I am experiencing, because it's easy to say wallow in self-pity. Oh, I'm in so much pain. Oh, my life sucks. Oh, this is so bad. We switch from identifying with the pain to just recognizing it. Say it's the pain rather than my pain. So rather than saying this is my grief, we think this is grief arising in my awareness. Just as other sensations arise and fall, so too emotions will rise and fall. So we disidentify a little bit, and then we can connect it to common humanity. We can shift from my pain to the pain to this pain that we all share in, that every human being has experienced or will experience at some time in their life. We can find that piece of unity behind it all. We find, okay, suffering is a part of life. I'm experiencing suffering right now, just as other human beings are experiencing suffering in their life. In that way, they're just like me, and I am just like them. So another poem. Walk gently on this earth with purposeful steps. You share this space with 7 billion human beings and countless other precious life forms. Just like you, they all want to be happy. Just like you, they all need love. We're not going to survive unless we walk gently on this earth together, until we touch something in others that feels just like the shards of our own pain, the fluttering warmth of our own joy, until we sew their wounds into our hearts and seal it with our own skin. So the general approach is that you have to be somebody before nobody. So the Buddha said attachment is the root of all suffering, and we release ourselves of that suffering by letting go, by not clinging to anything as I, me, or mine. This is the process of becoming nobody. I even have this book on my shelf with slogans and teachings from Ajahn Chah, a teacher in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition. And it shows an empty bench with a cane, and it's entitled No Ajahn Chah, meaning there's no Ajahn Chah there. So we are in this process of disidentifying anything we cling to as I, me, or mine. That includes our pain. This isn't my pain, this is the pain that all humanity experiences. However, we don't go straight there. We start with our somebodyness. We have to have a strong sense of self, what in psychology we call individuation, strong sense of self, sense of worthiness, sense of self-love, strong boundaries, strong self-esteem, etc. We have to work on ourselves, put our own oxygen mask on first. Once we have that strong sense of somebodyness, then we can work on letting it all go. After we've learned, then we can unlearn. After we've known, then we can unknow. So I say that just to honor wherever you might be on the path. A lot of people do jump to the letting go, surrendering, devotion aspect, and they lose themselves fully. They're already in pieces and shambles, and then things just float away. So we do start with ourselves as we increase our love and compassion to more and more beings. And that's one interesting thing about metta or loving kindness meditations is that traditionally with metta or cultivating loving kindness, you would always start with yourself. And the theory behind that was that you were the easiest person to extend love to. And then when that Eastern teaching came to those of us in the West, they found that for many participants, extending love to ourselves was actually the hardest. So sometimes when we do meditations nowadays, we prime the pump, so to speak. Okay, think of someone that you love. Usually pets work for most people. Think of your dog, and people are like, oh, yeah, I feel such an overwhelming sense of love for my dog. Okay, do you feel that warmth? Do you feel that light emanating from your heart? Okay, let's take that and let's give it to yourself. And that's one way to do it. So let's sit, yeah? So come to a comfortable seat. You might support the hips or support the knees, anything that gives you a solid foundation. When we say comfortable, we do mean comfortable, but a little bit of discomfort is normal and it's grist for the mill. It's part of our practice. In Zen, we say every weed is a treasure. So even the discomfort and the suffering can be used as fertilizer for our own growth and awakening. So with a solid foundation, we can straighten the spine, relax the shoulders, rest your hands on your knees or your lap facing up or facing down. Extend the neck, relax the jaw, soften the gaze. You might have your eyes slightly open in front of you, or if it feels safe, have the eyes closed. And calm the body, come into this present moment by taking a few deep breaths in and out of the nostrils, just breathing with ease, not forcing anything, just allowing the breath to come to you. And let's do a bit of mindful self-compassion, of connected, loving awareness. So don't go too extreme. We'll find some bit of discomfort in our life. Nothing big, just, a 5-pound weight to work with. So see if you could think of just like a challenging moment or event or something a little stressful, maybe a comment somebody made or an uncertainty about the future. Nothing too big, just to give ourselves an easy exercise. And our first step is to simply acknowledge that you are suffering. There is some unease, some dissatisfaction. The mantra is simple. This is a moment of suffering. With mindfulness, bear attention, not even judging it, just noticing. This is a moment of suffering. And see if you can hold it. And let's add that layer of common humanity. Suffering is a part of life. Seeing the suffering with mindfulness. This is a moment of suffering, and connecting it to common humanity. Suffering is a part of life. Thinking perhaps of other people on this planet who have gone through, are going through, or will go through the same thing. And our third and final layer is kindness and self-kindness. So after we notice the suffering with mindfulness, as we connect it to a larger common humanity, we treat ourselves the way a good friend would. And we ask ourselves, what do I need right now? How can I be kind to myself right now? And see what you might need. What might be your cupcake after dinner? Your way of meeting your own emotional needs. And as we shift from being an inner critic to being our own best friend, perhaps we can repeat the mantra in our own head, darling, referring to ourselves. Darling, I know that you are suffering, and that's why I am here for you. If you feel called, you might even take one or two hands to the heart, holding yourself tenderly, almost like you might hold a child having a tantrum, with tenderness and warmth so the tantrum can pass. Darling, I know that you are suffering, and that's why I am here for you. And as we are kind to others, recognizing the battles that they are fighting, we can be kind to ourselves as we fight our own battles. Mm. Mm. Walk gently on this earth with purposeful steps. You share this space with 7 billion human beings and countless other precious life forms. Just like you, they all want to be happy. Just like you, they all need love. We're not going to survive unless we walk gently on this earth together until we touch something in others that feels just like the shards of our own pain, the fluttering warmth of our own joy, until we sew their wounds into our hearts and seal it with our own skin. Mm. And honoring yourself for showing up for yourself, and whether or not you felt any real growth of self compassion, that's okay too. Just like the tree that reaches high to the heavens, day to day, we don't see much growth, but over time, it bears fruit and flowers. May our own practice bear the fruit and flowers of compassion, kindness, empathy, and the bedrock of love, understanding. Namaste.